These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. This episode of the Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Defend Security Cameras. Sitting here today with Mr. JR Dabey, and you'd reached out to see if I wanted to do a show on this subject, and I did not want to, and I still kind of don't, to be completely honest with you, but I also want to keep an open mind, especially to subjects that I've got some type of aversion to, or aversion. So tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so 30 years old. I've hunted my entire life. It's been an obsession with mine, borderline an illness since I was super young. Shot my first buck at 8, and it was all downhill after that. But I opened the HuntSource last year in September, which is my full career now, and it's fully what I do. Besides being a stay-at-home dad, my wife's been in dental school and in the process of dental school for 8 years, just graduated, and now she's in pediatric residency. So we still got 2 years left of the full 10-year program before she's fully a pediatric dentist. But that's really the short and sweet of who we are as a family. And besides that, we just hunt. We spend most of our summer traveling, scouting, and doing things in the outdoors. And then most of the fall, I'm either hunting solo with the family or with a couple of my close buddies.
And what is the HuntSource?
So the HuntSource, to make it the most clear-cut way of what it is right now, is we help with applications for Western hunting. And once guys draw tags, we help them make hunt plans to figure out how to hunt that area they drew and have specific areas to focus on, because the majority of our clients are coming from back east. They have not a lot of experience out west. And what I see happens the majority of the time is guys come out, they see these huge expanses of public land, and they just kind of end up wandering around, wasting a lot of time, or they don't have success. So they jump 8, 9, sometimes 20 miles to another area and are driving past animals. So with those hunt plans, I try my best to keep them focused, keep them where the animals should be, and make small movements until they find animals.
Okay. So you're helping them, navigate these crazy application systems, and then also acting as a consultant while, setting up the actual plan for their hunt. What about during the hunt? Are they calling you and being like, hey, this isn't working? Are you helping them out in the middle of the hunt as well?
Yeah, I currently have it set up where they can get a hold of me. So send me a message, because, kind of limited on what fully you can do there, because you're always right in that line of guiding. But yeah, they send me a message that, hey, this is what's going on so far in this hunt. This is what I've experienced, because really a hunt plan is worthless without that. I can do my best off of past experiences and understanding animals, understanding that certain area to make a plan. But as everybody knows who spent a lot of time in the woods, it's completely useless without using your skills to adapt to what you're encountering. So I try my best to have them get a hold of me a couple days in, and that's where we can really hone in and help them find success. And success isn't always killing an animal. A lot of times with these hunts, it's just finding animals and feeling like they're achieving more knowledge and more skills.
Okay. That when you're talking about that fine line of guiding, when you actually get into the language of what is legally considered to be guiding, it's different from state to state. Here in Oregon, if you are supporting somebody's expedition, whether that's hunting or fishing or whatever, by doing so much as making them food for their trip, that's legally guiding. And it covers so much stuff. It's absolutely crazy. And it's very, very strict. There's usually, like for us, I think maybe a third of our game wardens are specifically there to regulate outfitters and guides. And there's a lot of illegal guiding and a lot of illegal outfitting that goes on. It's pretty gnarly. And then as you get into special use permits, if you're going to be working on federal land or state land, it becomes even more complicated Oregon's guiding and outfitting is all managed by the Oregon State Marine Board, because the coastal fishery is everything for our state. So they manage all the elk hunting and everything. Even though I'm pretty sure the fish people don't know which end of an elk stands up first. It's crazy. So if you're talking about I imagine you wouldn't be able to tell a client a known position of an animal even if you knew it. Otherwise, that would be guiding, right?
Yeah, it's very gray on that. I've called all the states that we help in, which is every state out west except for California, and I've talked to game wardens and try to get everything recorded, having emails and all that. And they're always very gray on that specific thing, which is not something that we do at all, but it's something you need to ask about because it could be perceived that way and things like that. We've only been around since September, and I've already had things like that thrown at me, like, "Oh, you sent somebody to a specific animal." I'm like, "I sent them a pin to glass from, and there happened to be a buck below that pin. I can't control where that animal's at. I didn't know he was there. It's a migration." And so, yeah, no, it is that is one that I try to avoid, but it's crazy. There's people doing that, especially in Idaho. I've seen a pop up on a few different forums where they're selling, "Here's a picture of a deer, and here's $2,000 to go chase this specific buck," which is absolutely wild to me. For one, that somebody would do that, and for two, somebody else would pay for that because anybody who spent time in the woods, especially high mountains chasing mule deer, the odds of finding that buck from a pin is, I think the odds that that pin is fake and that deer was never there are much higher.
Yeah. It's a strange thing, and ultimately I feel like that is prostituting these animals more than anything else. And it gets really weird. But the thing that we're going to talk about here is preference points, and trying to explain preference points to somebody who doesn't hunt is a pretty big challenge. And it is one of the greatest barriers to entry in Western hunting today, in my opinion, is understanding preference points and understanding the tag application systems in all of these different states. So let's kind of break down what this stuff even is and what it gets you. And then ultimately we're going to get to whether people should be getting involved in that or not.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great conversation. That's where, the majority of my doors are opened. Most of my clients start with these applications and we help them there and then proceed into hunt plans. But yeah, the application process is, I grew up in it. I've been obsessed with it, honestly, more than hunting at most of my life. And so I've had a pretty good understanding of it. And then I've been able to evolve with it as it's changed rapidly. So since COVID, in my opinion. But just the gist of it is you have to have a tag to go hunt. And all of these states now for non-residents have a process of acquiring that tag. And whether it's a preference point state or bonus point state, we don't need to dive into that right away. But basically, you have to have the points required to draw the tag, or oftentimes have to have the points required to have the highest chances to draw that tag. And it varies wildly. And it's been kind of preached and I think commercially pounded into people's heads that it's not worth it to go on a hunt unless you have X amount of points for that state, which majority of the time just isn't true.
You've got 20 acres and your security camera can see about 50 feet from your Wi-Fi router. Your gate, your barn, your equipment, all the places you actually need to monitor, they're exactly where your Wi-Fi doesn't reach. That's where defense security cameras make a lot of sense. They work on cellular, just like your phone. But here's what's clever. They've got an embedded SIM card that automatically connects to the best network in your area. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. It finds whatever's strongest. No choosing providers, no contracts, no hassle. I'm using Defend cameras at my place. You mount it, open the Defend app on your phone, and you're done. 10 minutes. Clear footage, night vision, instant alerts, and here's something you need to know. Defend doesn't sell your data. Not to China, not to tech companies, not to anyone. They work for you, period. Defend your place. So what's the difference between a preference point and a bonus point?
Yeah. It's individually, different states do the preference and the bonus differently, but statistically, or not statistically, for the most part, saying preference means that you have to have the points required. So, say the previous year, the max points in that unit was 3 to draw that tag, then most likely it's going to take at least 3 this year. And if you have max applying for that tag, then you will automatically draw it. Bonus, in a lot of states, it's a squared system, like Washington and Nevada, for instance, or also Montana for the premium hunts. Every year that you apply, you get another entry, and then that's squared. So, say you have 20 points for elk in Washington, you're going in with 400 points or 400 chances of drawing a tag, which sounds great, from a zoomed out perspective. But then you look at the numbers and see that there is, oftentimes 600 other people entering for that tag that also have 400 or more opportunities. And then your chances go down to almost nothing. And then preference oftentimes is followed with bonus. So they say, let's use Utah for an example. 50% of the tags go to preference, 50% are a weighted draw. So pretty much a bonus, meaning anybody can draw, whether, like my wife, she drew a tag this year of 2 points. She went into that with 2 opportunities in the random draw, and she drew. So she drew in the random instead of having the max points.
Well, look, if I'm new to hunting and I'm listening to this right now, I'm seriously considering taking up golf. Like that's so confusing. Um, let's try to break this down even further.
Let's do it.
How do you get a preference point or a bonus point?
So the majority of states, you get your preference in one of 2 ways. You apply and don't draw, or you pay for it after the draw. Every state does it a little bit different. So to make it the most simple, when I make my plans, I go state by state. And so we'll just have it in order of the timelines and then how each state operates, because it's, I watch Bluey a lot with my kids, and they say when you talk too much, you don't hear anything. And that's what happens with these applications. You really have to break it down, talk about it state by state, or it just gets super confusing. You get all the states mixed up, and it becomes a mess in your head real fast. And so that's why I think for most people, applying for 5, 6, 7, 8 states isn't necessary. I think most people can get what they want, hunt every year with just 2 to 4 states. So however you want to break it down from there, just kind of let me know what you think.
So I need to apply for a lottery chance to go hunting for a species in a unit in a state. And if I am unsuccessful, then I will get a preference point, and then I'll have a better chance the next year.
Yeah, that's the simplest way of saying it. And there are states where you have to still buy it afterwards, like Wyoming, for instance. You're not automatically awarded that preference. You have to buy it after the fact, and they just raised it to $75. So that's why it's really important understanding each individual state and how those states go about the preference point system. And then we have states like Idaho where it's just completely random, which I think oftentimes is one of the best ways to go about it.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is there's more people who want to hunt than there are animals to be hunted.
Exactly.
And because of that, we need to find ways to bottleneck that demand. And the supply, being the resource, being the animals, is not increasing. Elk and deer populations throughout the West are decreasing right now. Mule deer populations have been decreasing for about 70 years. And in places like Oregon, it is at a very, very scary level, a level now where it doesn't look like we're going to come back from it. Now, it's been worse before, and they came back, but the conditions that they got to come back in were much better than any of the conditions that we can foreseeably, predict are coming in the future. So one of my struggles is that some of these units, some of these hunts take over 20 years of application to draw that tag. And there are a lot of people who invest in that, and they apply every year. They send their money into the state. They get nothing back except for a preference point or a bonus point, and the hope that maybe some year they'll be able to draw. And then we have point creep, where maybe 20 years ago this only took 5 points to draw, and now it takes 25 points to draw. This year, more than any other year in the past, I've gotten calls from guys who are finally able to draw these tags, and they're no longer physically able to hunt on their own because they're too old. And that's where point creep inevitably ends up. That's where all point creep ends up, is with people who have applied for so long that they can no longer physically do the hunt. And I really want to encourage people not to do that. Don't get on that train. And I want people hunting more often. And it sounds like you have a strategy to help them do that.
Absolutely. I think for, units like that take 20, in some cases 30 plus points do have their place, but only if you have a plan set up where you don't really care if you draw that tag or not. And you're financially stable enough that it's okay to throw that money away. Because let's be honest, you are throwing that money away until someday that does strike and you draw that. So what happens is you need to have states set up where you can draw tags every single year. And if you want to, you can do that and throw that money away in the meantime. But what that means is having a strategy. So what we tend to do with that is we have these low point states that you can hunt every single year. And it's different for every hunter because most states have tags that you can draw, every year or every other year, but it's going to be dependent on that hunter, what's worth their time to go out there and hunt those. And then we have the mid tier, because what happens is when you're drawing hunts every year, as a back burner, these other states are like, okay, I drew this tag in, say, Idaho. It's a random draw in December, right? So you can randomly draw that. Now, all these other states, Wyoming, Colorado, Oregon, now you don't have to hunt those states that year. We get a point in those states. And so that continues to happen. As you get more points in more states, you draw tags and you're building up in other ones as well. And so you start with this circle where you can go through 3 or 4 states, continually have tags every year, and you're not depending on getting really lucky to go on those hunts. And I think that's the best way to do it. And then if you want to have like a premium, like I don't like to burn spots, but we can name the hardest to draw tag in the country, right? The strip, for example, in Arizona. Most of us are never going to reach that in our lifetime. But if it really matters to you and you don't want to hunt Arizona deer for coos deer or anything else, then you can just keep putting in for that every year while you're drawing all these other states and drawing your tags. So I'd say that's the simplest way to say that without really diving into the particular states and the draws and all of that, because it's a lot.
My challenge for something like that is to take, for example, the Mount Emily unit here in Northeast Oregon. This was one of our very best deer units in the state, and it produced a lot of big bucks for many decades. But for the past 10 years or so, it hasn't. And most people that finally draw that tag, which is well over 20 points, they are hunting it off of the reputation that they grew up with. And that reality is no longer on the ground. So they've invested 2.5 decades into trying to get this tag. Then they get there and they find that there are very few deer left at all. A lot of people don't see a single buck. A lot of people come away with a forked horn buck because they've spent 2.5 decades trying and they're not coming home with nothing. So they shoot a baby deer, and that only makes it harder and harder in the future. So if you're trying to crystal ball these areas and say, look, I'll apply for the Arizona Strip for 30 years. Who is to say that the Arizona Strip is even going to be good in 30 years from now?
Yeah, and my rebuttal to that would be it's some of these areas, and it really depends on your upbringing and how because like say you're getting into this at 30 years old, you didn't grow up listening to your grandfather talk about the Strip or the Kaibab and places like that. And so there's not a lot of value. and there's probably no reason to do that. But for somebody like me, if I ever get my name pulled for a strip tag, even if there isn't giant deer living there anymore, and like anybody knows the strip well knows there's not a lot of deer there. It's a very arid, dry place, not a lot of animals running around it. For me, it would be more the experience of getting to be there with a tag in my pocket, and I would be happy no matter the outcome of that hunt. And that's the reality of a lot of these places. And I made a reel about this the other day. The gap between the best units in the country and a lot of these lower tier average hunts is getting smaller and smaller because the age class and oftentimes the genetics aren't there anymore in the best units in the country, just like you're saying. And so you have to understand what you're applying for. You're oftentimes not applying for a better hunt with bigger animals. You're applying for that legacy.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing to stop people from wanting to do that. It just seems crazy to me. I had this really lovely fly fishing client who fished with me many times, and he was an accountant from Chicago. Sanj Pai, I love that guy. And he used to say that lottery is a tax on people who can't do math.
Right.
And when I look at state lotteries, whether it's video poker or whatever, a lot of states generate a huge amount of revenue from their lotteries. It's kind of a poor tax, and I see it in that light oftentimes is like, we're taxing folks who don't understand that they're being taxed in this way. And it's a little bit sad to me because again, it feels like the prostitution of animals. And theoretically that money is supposed to be going into conservation projects to help these animals. Reality, it's hard to see. It's hard to see because, these populations are not doing all that well. And then I look at other opportunities like being able to go to, Africa or Australia or New Zealand or Texas, places where you can plan your hunt on your own schedule and know that it's going to happen and not have to deal with any of this preference point chaos. It seems like a much better solution and a more affordable one in a lot of cases too. When I was applying for, gosh, I think 6 or 7 states was the most I was ever applying in, I was spending over $2,000 a year just in applications. That's a heavy hit.
And it's a lot more than that now. So, they've went up and skyrocketed. I agree 100% with that. I think it just comes down to the individual and what is most important to you. I have a fixation on mule deer and elk, especially. I also like chasing whitetails and blacktail, but mule deer and elk, especially, is very romanticized to me. And going on a trip to Africa just doesn't have any value to me. And Alaska, I'd love to get up there a couple times and check some of those off my list. But really, what calls to me is these places that I grew up reading about. I love reading, O'Connor and all those, these places that they walked around, and then places that, Mike Eastman talked about a lot in the 90s and all of that. That stuff just really calls to me. And that's why I like chasing these applications and I enjoy the process of that. And two, I think it's important.
Loved hunting in Africa. Both of those guys loved hunting in Africa. When Jack DeVonner was in Africa, he didn't want to come back and hunt the States ever again. So I honestly, I love hearing that you're not interested in hunting in Africa, because that tells me you literally don't know what you're missing. You don't understand the opportunities that are on that continent, and they are so vast and interesting and awesome. And so much more achievable than what people give them credit for. So I love that you've got a lot of love for the mule deer and for the elk. I do too, of course, but don't write that off in your mind and tell yourself that you're not interested, because I guarantee you any hunter's lack of interest in Africa comes exclusively from them not understanding what that opportunity and what that experience is actually like.
Yeah, well, let me reword that. I wouldn't say I don't have any opportunity. I don't have the inclination to work towards that yearly. Like if I wanted to hunt Africa, consistently, I would be setting money away to go on those trips, to get the animals back, everything that goes into an Africa hunt, right? And I will go there eventually. Something I would love to do with my wife. I think it would be a great trip that we would really enjoy together. And then when the kids get older, I'm sure I'll enjoy the adventure of it because I do like Hemingway and all of that stuff. There is a lot of adventure there. It's what the Wild West that I grew up dreaming about. It still exists out there, right? It's still wild, and I would love to do it someday. But I can yearly work on, killing, or not, I don't want to say killing, but hunting mule deer, hunting elk, and having these experiences. And for me, like for instance, last year I burned 5 points in the state I'm currently at home in Utah on a very difficult tag, but it's one of those units I grew up reading about. It used to be one of the best in the country, and it's not anymore. It's honestly a pretty terrible unit now.
Well,
Lived there and got a lot of stocks in, and that's what I'm all about is just getting to experience those places.
you don't need a tag to do that.
Right, but it's different, you got a tag in your pocket, but yeah, I made a reel about that the other day. I do my best, like, when family, like my grandfather, for example, when he draws these tags that he has 30 points for, I always go on them because you don't have to be successful, in these units and have a tag in your pocket to experience it, just go with somebody else who has a tag, help them, and it's exactly the same as if you did it, in my opinion, especially nowadays, man. My grandpa kills a great buck on the strip, I'll replicate it and hang it on my wall. We did that together, and that's the memory that we'll always have. And, I want to have it there to show my kids and talk about.
Yeah, I appreciated that reel. And it's so Utah. That was such a Utah reel of like, and that's the reality of hunting down there. It's like you got a group of a bunch of guys, they all apply, and every year or two, one of them out of the group is going to draw, and everybody goes, right? But your opportunity to actually be that tag holder is fairly limited, in a lot of places in that state.
Oh, for sure. And if you're that one guy with the tag and you take all the glory of it, I don't think you understand what's happening. The same like on guided hunts. I was a guide for a long time and I'll still do it periodically. The my favorite clients are the guys like, man, like it doesn't feel like I'm being guided. It feels like I'm with a group of friends right now. And this animal was a collective effort. And I think that's really the mindset you have to have on that. Because the trigger pull doesn't matter, right? That's the easiest part of the whole thing.
Can be, can be challenging too, but yeah, depends how you're living that day, I guess.
For some more than others, right?
So, what is a hunt in this country that you think is overrated that people should no longer be no longer be applying for?
Man, I would put moose right at the top of that, just off the top of my head. Especially you start diving, you're gonna take a whole species. I would just say moose in general. I say in most states it gets chased really hard and kind of gets put up there as the pinnacle just because it's so difficult to draw. But like you look into, Shires versus Canadian, there's a really fine line. All of a sudden they move over a line and they go from Shires to Canadian. I think you're better off putting that money aside and going on a hunt in Canada and killing a moose if you want to kill a moose of that size. Ideally, you go up to the Yukon, or up in Alaska and you kill a true, giant moose. But yeah, I think saving for 25 to 35 years and then spending $4,000 on a tag to hunt moose, yeah, that's one for me that's hard to swallow. Maybe just because I see so many of them, and every time I let off a cow call for an elk in Utah, I have a 30-inch moose in my lap. I don't know, but to me, I think that's one that definitely gets overrated a lot.
They're also one of the first species to go once wolves show up.
Oh yeah, for sure. And ticks, man. The ticks with the moose is a very, you see it once and it's just an image you can't get out of your mind.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty rough.
Have you seen that down there by you at all?
So we had a population of over 70 moose here for a while that that had moved in kind of on the wake of the wolf push into Idaho. And we see that as wolves move into an area, the moose leave, and then the moose that stay largely die. They just suffer horribly to that predation. But we saw the same thing with Nevada, right? Moose moved down into the southern desert in Idaho, and then went all the way south until they were in Nevada. And Nevada almost immediately opened a moose season. Now, Oregon did not. Oregon didn't want to acknowledge this species at all, and said that moose are not native to Oregon. And fortunately, I had a copy of the hunting regulations from 1902 in one of my family journals, and it had moose on there. It was open season year round. So that unfortunately didn't change anything for the state. They were not interested in protecting that species. They were not interested in any type of conservation. And now I think they're all gone. I think they've all been killed. There were a couple that were poached. There have been a few that were killed by the tribe, and the rest have all died to predation, which is very sad. So we had an opportunity to really establish a moose population here, and to do something for them and protect them, and we let that go. And before most Oregonians ever knew that we had moose, they were gone.
That's interesting. I honestly, so I grew up just over the border from you. Spent most of my time in my teenage years hunting just north of Walla Walla. And I would say probably about 15 years ago, they started showing up in the wheat fields. We actually had them in Pasco, right outside Tri-Cities. We had them showing up in the wheat fields. And then I'd say about 10 years ago, they were in the blues. And it kind of just like you're talking about, we went from no moose to we'd see 4 or 5 every time we were out. But I moved to Idaho. It would be about 6 years ago now. So it's interesting to hear what's happened in the past 6 years. I wasn't even aware of that. You know, you get micro focused on deer and elk, and nobody talks about the moose. I think for a couple of different reasons, just like you listed. So that's interesting to hear. Sorry to sidetrack you. I just was super curious to hear your side of the border on it.
Yeah, I imagine it's really similar up there. I bet that the moose population that they had is now significantly reduced, if not completely extirpated.
Yeah. No, I would expect the same. I know our elk in the blues are struggling really bad. It's a sad deal. Mule deer are pretty much gone. And yeah, I've been married 11 years this year. So 11 years ago would be the first year I hunted that really hard at archery, and there was mule deer everywhere up there in those wheat fields. And then I remember it pretty much felt like it got cut in half every year to the point where now it's pretty much just whitetails. You don't see very many mule deer.
Yeah. Yeah, I found documentation about the early releases of whitetail that happened in the Toucannon, and it was in the 1930s. And they
You
actually
told me about
released a
that.
blacktail in there. They released a blacktail in there as well, which makes me wonder where they found the whitetail from. And I dug as hard as I could on figuring that out. I had a feeling that since they had blacktail and whitetail in the same trailer, that they might have gone over to the Oregon coast and gotten Columbia whitetail deer. But I can't find it. I can't figure it out. It's too long ago.
Well, also too, in those early documents, you see a lot of confusion between blacktail and mule deer, and oftentimes, like in northern Washington, I've seen mule deer being called blacktail quite a bit, and also too, I think the lines are completely different. Interesting enough, I don't know the exact size, but I believe it's right around like 250 is the Washington state record, and he came out of the Rimrock unit above Rimrock Lake, which now is entirely bench lakes, and I'd say if you see a deer over 110 inches, it would be incredible, 120 inches. And that's back then, you know, pretty much on the west side is where that 250 inch had to have been a mule deer was killed. So it's really interesting looking back at all the early and how much all of those borders have changed.
And what is a bench leg for those who don't know?
Bench leg is a blacktail mule deer mix, and they kind of get that name because it's said that they're supposed to have large bodies and smaller legs. I don't see that very consistently. Maybe that's how it used to be, but now it's like they're all different. It's just like breeding two different species of dogs, two different breeds of dogs. You kind of get what you get, and they're all their own flavor of chocolate.
Yeah. And there is some hybridization of mule deer and white-tailed deer. Still not a lot of good research around that and what that means if those animals are sterile or if they're viable. Um, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But the whitetail have definitely moved into lots of country where historically they were not, right? Even even here in the valley, it was still very much worth bringing up if you saw white-tailed deer in the 90s. You know, we first started really seeing them in the 70s. Um, but now they're up in the alpine, they're throughout the canyons. Whitetail are in lots and lots of places. Unfortunately, they seem to be a little bit more susceptible to diseases like chronic wasting disease and epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It makes me worried about trying to stack preference points for that species as well. Now, we did finally get the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to recognize that whitetail and mule deer are different species. So at least in Northeast Oregon this year, for the first time ever, you had to declare which of these species you were planning on hunting.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Far too many mule deer tags, but at least you've got to declare your species now.
That's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see how it goes. Another thing that probably really complicates your world is drawing new unit boundaries, which Oregon has been doing a lot of, and I think a couple other states out there are doing the same. We're looking at completely redrawing our elk boundaries in the coming year or two. We'll see if that happens or not. But what are your thoughts on stuff like that?
You got to really stay on top of it. It's a big mistake I see a lot of guys making, especially that's why I don't give out areas of my plans, area codes. I obviously give out areas, but I'll say, hey, no, this is a specific unit this season is one we want. Pull it out of the regulations because those codes change so much. Guys end up with, you see it a lot in Oregon, guys drawing the Mount Emily spike tag. And like, oh, I drew Mount Emily. It's like, you might want to look at what number that was. But yeah, no, I think that's a big thing, especially like you're talking about Oregon. They changed those deer areas this year, and it's interesting. You know, they took some of the least sought after units in Oregon and combined them into the most sought after. You know, you see that in quite a few different units there, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays into odds and everything else. But I think the biggest reason why we're seeing that is we're starting to get more biology being involved in the process than there was in the past, and they're seeing some of the mistakes they made. The same happened in Wyoming. They're like, hey, this particular unit in this region, these deer are actually migrating into the same winter range as this region across the valley. So we need to take this unit and put it into that region. And I think that's great because then you're actually managing the animals being killed from that certain area instead of, you know, possibly hurting a population that might have been more damaged by a winter kill or, you know, like you said, EHD, you know, blue tongue, whatever it may be. I think that's great to see more science being used and, you know, less of whatever they based it off of in the past.
Something really interesting with EHD that happened here last year. We got hit by EHD pretty hard, and it affected the cattle. And there was very little communication that occurred between the Oregon Department of Agriculture, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Oregon State Veterinarian. What happened is a lot of calves were either stillborn, they were born without brains, they were born with without skull caps, and their brains were exposed. They died soon after birth due to lack of brain function, and the state veterinarian said that was because of EHD. And with an El Nino year, warm winter, you know, fairly wet spring so far, we're looking at the conditions required for EHD to happen again because it comes from a biting midge that does a lot better during prolonged warm periods.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting hearing you call it EHD. I feel like you know, Oregon and Washington tend to hear contributed to blue tongue. And it's like, I always joke, there's like this fine line in Montana where EHD turns into blue tongue. But yeah, no, it's a big problem. And the good thing about whitetails, at least, is they do go up and down a lot. But the connection to cattle is something I've been looking into as well. Because I noticed in an area I guide turkeys, there was a fence. And it seemed like where the cattle were, that back acreage back in there was having a lot worse issues with not CWD, with blue tongue, as we call it, instead of the other side of the fence where there was no cattle. It seemed like there was no issues at all, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, I mean the midge requires water.
Yeah.
So that's a major factor, right? Are you close to the breeding conditions that those midges require? And a lot of times cattle are in places that have water because they need to drink more than these other critters.
I also too theorize that they often create more standing water, because it's like this area in specific, right? We got a creek bottom. One side has more free flowing, other side where the cattle are spending a lot of time, they tend to erode that bank, right? So you get a lot more areas where the water pulls back and is stagnant. And so, but the deer move back and forth and everything. So it's interesting. I also had a couple guys reach out in Montana and they were kind of seeing the same thing. So it's definitely interesting to me. But yeah, no, the water, if there's blue tongue, you walk a creek bottom, you're going to find some deadheads.
Yeah, and it kills these animals so fast. I mean, it's killing deer in less than 72 hours.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Up in northern Washington, there was a unit that we used to, my little brother and little sister would draw it every 2 years, go up there, kill a good whitetail. There's deer everywhere. And blue tongue was always a thing, and the population would go up and down. But one year it hit bad, and we came back the following year, and there was doe deer. You'd see, in wheat fields that year in 2 years prior had 80 plus whitetails feeding on them right before dark, or alfalfa fields, sorry. There's no deer. You might see one doe with a fawn. And it's incredible how fast it'll change the population.
Another one that is pretty gnarly that I don't think people have given enough credit to is hoof rot, and that's started in Washington more so than Oregon, but now it's very much in Oregon, and it's in the timber, it's in the prairie, it's in the canyons, and it causes these elk to grow their hooves really fast, and that changes the angle that their foot strikes the ground. It breaks the tendons in their ankles, and pretty soon they're crippled. Their body condition gets really low, and over the past few years, I've seen hoof rot increase throughout the summertime and into the fall, and then I see zero hoof rot animals in early spring after the snow comes off because they've all been killed. So this is a fatal disease, not for the sake of the disease itself, but because these animals can't keep up with the herd, their body condition gets too low, and then the predators freaking smoke them. That boosts the predator population, and then they're able to work on healthy animals at a higher rate than normal. All of this to say that I still don't think it's a good idea to plan on a hunt being good any distance into the future. My outlook on it is fairly pessimistic.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to bring up hoof rot because I actually grew up in the area where it came from, and yeah, I'd love to talk about that more. But yes, let's go back into the application part of it. I think you can't look at those points that you have as being set up for that one unit, right? You have to, unless you're talking about like what I was earlier, like, hey, I dream about being in this one place. I don't care what the animals are doing when I draw that tag. I just want to be there, tag in my pocket, and then great. But otherwise, if it's the state that you're choosing to be the state that you grow a lot of points in, you need to be flexible. You need to be willing to move. Let's use Colorado, for example. There's one specific basin, right? I'm not going to name what it is, but most people say Colorado deer. You know what basin I'm talking about. That's not the best deer hunting in Colorado anymore. Guys have 25. There's guys with that this year were burning 25 points on the second season, which is much easier to draw, just to be in the basin. And they're making a hunt that was 7 points possibly climb to over 20 because they just want to be there. And that's the only place that big deer exist. Colorado has the biggest deer in the country. There is not a unit in Western Colorado that has not produced a 200-inch deer. They have all lived there at one point. The genetics are there, and the country, the remote country, oak brush, whatever it may be, there is country there that allows deer to hit that age. So there's no reason, to have those points and be set on a certain unit that's no longer what it used to be. And I agree 100% with you. Guys that are waiting for that And then you talk to them like, I have 25 points. I'm like, what do you want to kill? And they're like, oh, just a good 4 point. And I'm honest with them. I'm like, man, do you realize you could have killed 15 good 4 points at this point? No, like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like, if you have to know exactly what you're looking for and have realistic expectations of what will give you that. And that's why it's important for have people out there like me and like you. They're like, hey, you're being kind of dumb. Like you can do what you want right now and go out and do that. You don't need to burn all that money and all that time and possibly be let down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the bottom line that I think both of us want is to find ways to help people succeed. And I'm always careful about defining success. I don't want to define success for somebody else on my own terms. But I do want to help people understand what the options for success are. And one option for success is waiting a very long time for a unit that has a good reputation so that you have the opportunity to hunt in that place where there is currently a potential for there being a really large animal in there, and then less competition with other hunters. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of a hard to draw unit is you're not getting overrun by a lot of people because there are just fewer hunters allowed to hunt in those areas every year. That said, oftentimes people know the best places to be in those units. So you're still going to have competition. You're still going to have other guys that are in that basin or hunting that ridge with you.
Yeah, no, I've been in that situation. For instance, my grandfather's gotten lucky and drawn one of the best migration tags in Idaho twice. He actually drew it second time in the second draw, which is like, my best friend that's lived in Idaho for 50 years has never seen anybody to draw it. He told me he thought it was a scam. And Grandpa's drawn it twice. And there's only 40 tags. It's a huge unit. And almost everybody hunts the same road on the last 5 days of the hunt. The hunt goes on for 40 days. And the last 5 days of the hunt, every year, I swear to you, there's 30 trucks on this one road. And it's crazy. It's like, just like you said, even though you wait a long time and you draw this tag that's almost impossible to draw, you can still end up, if you don't do your own planning and, your own research of what animals do, you can still end up right on top of everybody else and be frustrated. So I think at the end of the day,
What's the most points? What's the most points you'd recommend somebody having for deer in Colorado?
deer in Colorado, that's going to change in 2028. But right now, I would say 4. I would say there's no reason to have more than 4. And I would say ideally, if you just want to learn a unit and get out and hunt, you can do it with 1 or 2. That's really what I do. And that's what I cycle through in Colorado. I actually got lucky this year. I got hit with point creep, and my unit that I would have drawn last year with 3 points, point creep knocked me out of it this year, but ended up being good because my grandpa got a return tag in Arizona for a very good elk unit, and so it worked out for me. I was actually happy to have point creep for once in my life. But yeah, I'd say 4 is about max.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. A question that I often get that I don't know how to answer is where should people be applying for deer hunts in Oregon? Because my current answer is nowhere. There's a gentleman who had bought thousands of dollars worth of lottery tickets this year to try to win one of the super hunts. And he's like, where should I do if I get this tag? And I said, burn it. Because we only have like 9 mule deer left, and it would be a shame to turn it into 8. And he didn't listen to me and continued spending more money on more of those lottery tags. But is there a unit in this state that is worth hunting for deer anymore?
I do apply in Oregon just because there are some areas that I would love to experience, and I have good friends that live there and know them extremely well. And I would say that's the exception. If you have somebody who lives there and knows it very well and knows where some animals are, and you want to go hunt with them, then yeah, build up the points it takes to draw it. But as a non-resident, for hunts that aren't very good, it's very hard for you to get into them, and I don't think it's worth non-residents' time. I know a lot of residents who don't feel it's worth their time anymore, and they're hunting everywhere else. Same with Washington. Um, Washington and Oregon are the only two Western states where I have a lot of clients. Well, in California too, but
Right. Interesting.
every other
California is
state,
pretty.
there's no one. Just continue. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say California is pretty slept on as a hunting opportunity, I feel like.
Yeah, actually, the only reason that I don't do a lot of applications in California, well, I actually don't have anybody apply, is it's almost impossible to draw any of the decent tags, but there's actually a lot of really good over-the-counter deer hunting opportunity, especially for guys that have a deep fall and they want to add another season. A freaking July archery hunt, like, that's pretty cool. There's a lot of good over-the-counter opportunities. But black bear hunting, man, I'm not big on bear hunting, outside of hounds and baits, but if you're big on spot stock bear hunting, you want to shoot a big bear, there's a lot of giant bears in California. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity down there. And I've seen you talk about that a little bit, just how cheap it can be to go hunt predators and how much opportunity there is, especially in our three, Western states, California, Oregon, and Washington. The amount of bears is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I just got a message a couple days ago from a gentleman who had decided to opt for that, and he came out and did a mountain lion hunt and was actually able to call in a mountain lion and kill it with his son in Oregon. That's a $16 non-resident tag, and like they did it. They were successful on the most statistically difficult hunt in North America, and it cost less than a hamburger at a pub. Like,
That's so
I
cool.
couldn't be happier for them.
No, that's so cool. I tell clients that too. They're like, hey, like, I want to come out and hunt out west, but like my falls are kind of busy right now. What can I do to prepare? Give me a good idea. I'm like, go hunt Washington for black bears. A lot of the units open in August. There is a lot of bears. Growing up in Washington, I had several days in the fall where we saw over 20 bears. There's a lot of bears. Tag is a little bit more expensive because Washington just increased their prices, but there's a lot of great opportunity there. And it's just an easy, barrier-free entry. Same with spring bear, in Idaho or Montana. But it's definitely a lot. You're going to see other hunters. You're not going to see another hunter on an August bear hunt in Washington.
Yeah, no, really not in Oregon either. And again, that's another $16.50 tag, and you can get 2 fall bear tags. You can get 2 cougar tags that are year round. Like, these are tremendous opportunities to get out and hunt and have a great hunt. It offers the qualities of every other hunt, right? Whatever it is that you like about sheep hunting, besides killing a borderline edible animal with horns shaped like bananas, like, it offers all of that adventure. It's in the same terrain. And yeah, it's just so much more accessible that people look past it. They think that this thing that, they might never get the opportunity for is going to be better. I think that what's better is the opportunity that's available.
It's the scarcity mindset, right? We see that right now in Idaho. That's part of why I've gotten to where I got up to, is because I was talking about that Idaho general draw. And the scarcity mindset was people going crazy. Like, the messages I was getting, you would have thought that Idaho was handing out Gila, or San Carlos elk tags. Like, just because they're hard to get now. And also everybody wants it. I'm like, why didn't you want it 5 years ago when you could pull into, Lucky's, Bob's Corner Stop, in Boise, and grab your tag over the counter and go hunt? Nobody cared about it then. But now that it's a draw, all of a sudden everybody and their mom wants to do it. And, it's interesting what scarcity does to everybody, but especially the hunter.
Yeah, I mean, just a few years ago, if I killed an elk in Idaho, I could just go down to the gas station and buy another tag. Um, it was awesome. But these things have changed. And it's a supply and demand issue, like many other things. But the biggest difference is that the supply is currently decreasing.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Especially for
but
deer.
and elk, dude. Like, Wallowa County, where I'm at, historically we had 28,000 to 30,000 elk. And it was like that for many, many decades. Current count's 8,000.
Yeah. Anywhere that the wolves have been allowed.
This is the best elk hunting in Oregon. And
Oh yeah.
we're
No, bar none.
lost 2/3 of them in the past few years.
It's, in my opinion, people are going to get on me for this. I think a lot of it just comes down to wolves. You look at it, use Idaho, for example, look at the units that are above the objective and have been steadily going uphill, and look at the ones that are below objective and going downhill. For the most part, and Oregon and Washington are the exception, right? Because you can't hunt wolves no matter what. But in Idaho, it paints a clear picture. The areas that are mostly wilderness, where it's very difficult for somebody to trap, very difficult for people to get in there and hunt it hard, the elk populations continue to drop. Places that have a lot of access, more logging roads, whatever, more open, whatever it may be, and we've been able to efficiently hunt wolves, populations are doing great. And so to me, it's pretty cut and clear, there's wolves are a problem. And yeah, we're dealing with the same thing in Washington. But same range right there in the blue is just absolutely decimated. It's it's hard to watch, especially if you grew up, watching blues bulls and just dreaming about them, watching them disappear. It's hard to deal with, especially like, the Winaha, Mount Emily, those units. I remember growing up, guys didn't kill bulls under 380. And now it seems like most guys are happy with like a 330, 340 bull, which is crazy.
It's crazy, but it's also a little bit crazy to care about some inches of antler that you don't even know if they're there or not without a tape measure.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It's definitely a strange thing that's been, honestly, I would go to the point of saying it's been bred in to our DNA as, multi-generational Western hunters. And it's happy to say it's something that's being bred out. I don't talk to my kids about inches, and it's not something that we really seek. We seek mature animals, and, we seek the animals that are more difficult to hunt and give us what we're looking for. And my grandfather, I watched him pass up one of the biggest deer I've seen in my life because he didn't break 200. He was a 3 on one side. And my grandpa's probably going to listen to this and be shaking his head because I bring it up to him weekly. 3 on one side, and he was a 7 on other. He had pitchforks in the front, pitchforks in the back, big kicker, and then 3 on the other, and Coke can bases. But with that tag, Grandpa really wanted to break 200. It was his hunt. That's what he wanted. And so we let him walk away. And saw him 2 more times. Grandpa decided he wanted to shoot him. And then I actually think he ended up getting poached, believe it or not. But yeah, it just, it's because of a score. And it's, man, it'd be cool to have that buck on the wall to show the kids. But the stories are just as good, in my opinion.
Yep. Never pass something on the first day that you would take on the last day. No, still there?
Sorry, my headphones died. Can you still hear me good?
Yeah, ish. Okay, so I had a little bit of a technical. Oh, you're good. We're about to wrap up here.
Okay.
Okay, so where can people find you if they want help planning their hunts, managing their preference points, navigating these horribly difficult systems?
Yeah, you just hop on the website. It's super easy. It's just thehuntsource.com. You also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Again, it's just the HuntSource.
Awesome. Well, folks, if you are planning an out-of-state hunt, I highly encourage you using a service like this. And there's a few of them out there. Something that I really appreciate about you, JR, is you're a really authentic person. I'm never ever seeing you representing an opinion that's not your own. I don't see you faking anything. You don't use some kind of phony internet voice when you're talking. Like you are who you are, and I genuinely believe that you want the best for your clients, and you want to help them achieve their version of success, which is awesome. And that comes, I think, probably from your guiding background and a few other things. So folks, do consider using a resource like this, because these hunts are expensive and we don't get to do them nearly enough. And if you want it to be the difference between something you did and a memory that, will be flashing across your eyes on your deathbed, then go ahead and put the extra effort in to talk to an expert to make sure everything goes smooth.
No, I appreciate that. Those are kind words.
All right, brother. Well, good luck to you this season. I hope you and your clients draw every tag that they could possibly hope for. And we'll be staying in touch so that we can argue about this stuff for many years to come.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate it. It was good talk. Talk to you later.
Appreciate you. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.